You know what? I've seen a lot of stupid things in my 700 rotations around this miserable galaxy. Wars fought over the color of sand. Entire fleets destroyed because someone mispronounced a greeting. Trade disputes that escalated into planetary genocide over the price of fermented root vegetables. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sheer audacity of what I witnessed on the fourth moon of Kepler 9b. The humans call it Tuesday. We call it the day logic went to die. My name is Vex, and before you ask, yes, that's short for something unpronounceable that roughly translates to the one who documents stupidity for future generations to laugh at. I work for the Galactic Observer Corps, which is basically a fancy way of saying I get paid to watch other species make terrible decisions and write reports about it. The assignment seemed simple enough. Princess Lyra of the Ethereal Empire, that's the tall, pale, pointy-eared folks who think they invented breathing, was scheduled to sign a peace treaty with the Grimlock Horde. The Grimlocks, for those keeping score at home, are exactly what you'd expect from something called a horde. Big, ugly, violent, and about as diplomatically inclined as a plasma grenade. The treaty signing was supposed to happen on neutral ground, a nice, peaceful little ceremony in the ancient amphitheater of Sanctum Prime. Very civilized, very proper, very boring. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, where do I even begin? First, let me paint you a picture. Princess Lyra stands about 8 feet tall, has skin like moonlight, and carries herself with the kind of grace that makes lesser beings weep with inadequacy. She's also stubborn as a quantum-locked door and twice as immovable. The kind of person who would argue with a supernova about proper stellar etiquette. The human? Well, that's where things get interesting. Marcus Kane. Yes, that Marcus Kane. The same lunatic who single-handedly held off the siege of Proxima Station with nothing but a broken rifle and what witnesses described as an unreasonable amount of profanity. The man who made the Draconian Empire apologize. To him. In writing. Nobody, and I cannot stress this enough, nobody expected him to show up to a diplomatic function. I was floating about 50 meters above the amphitheater in my observation pod, munching on crystallized algae wafers and thinking about how I was going to spend my hazard pay, when the first sign of trouble appeared. A messenger ship burning through the atmosphere like a comet with anger management issues. It crashed, rather spectacularly, right into the center of the ceremonial platform. The pilot, a bedraggled ethereal with singed robes, stumbled out, screaming something about betrayal and assassins. Classic opener, really. I've seen this particular drama play out about 47 times across 12 different star systems. Princess Lyra, to her credit, didn't even flinch. She just stood there, looking mildly annoyed, like someone had served her tea at the wrong temperature. "Speak clearly, Messenger Finn," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that could make a black hole think twice about its life choices. "Your Highness," Finn gasped, clutching what appeared to be a ceremonial scroll that had seen better centuries. The Grimlocks. They never intended to honor the treaty. General Thok has surrounded the amphitheater with 5,000 warriors. They plan to kill you the moment you sign. Now, this is where most rational beings would do the sensible thing. Run, hide, call for backup, maybe invest in some really good life insurance. Princess Lyra? She smoothed down her ceremonial robes, adjusted her crown, and walked calmly to the center of the platform. "I see," she said, like someone had just informed her that her favorite restaurant was out of soup. "How disappointing." That's when I started reaching for my emergency evacuation controls. Professional observers are trained to recognize the signs of imminent catastrophic stupidity, and all the warning lights in my pod were flashing colors that don't have names in most languages. The ground began to rumble. The ancient stone walls of the amphitheater started to crack as thousands of armored boots marched in perfect synchronization. The Grimlocks were coming, and they weren't coming for tea and pleasant conversation. General Thok himself appeared first, because, of course, he did. 7 feet of scarred muscle wrapped in battle armor that had clearly been designed by someone who thought subtlety was a dirty word. His followers poured in behind him like a tide of violence and questionable personal hygiene. "Princess," Thok's voice boomed across the amphitheater, the kind of sound that could shatter glass and make small children have nightmares. "You will sign the treaty, as agreed, but you will sign it in your own blood as you die." Lyra didn't even turn around. She just kept walking toward the ceremonial table, her heels clicking against the stone with the steady rhythm of a countdown timer. "How very dramatic, General. Did you practice that line?" 5,000 Grimlock warriors lined the edges of the amphitheater. 5,000 weapons pointed at one stubborn princess who apparently thought sarcasm was an adequate defense against overwhelming military force. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a plasma cutter and sold it by the pound. That's when Marcus Kane decided to make his entrance. I heard him before I saw him. The distinctive whine of a human atmospheric entry craft pushed way beyond its safety specifications. The ship came screaming out of the clouds like a meteor with a death wish, trailing smoke, and what appeared to be at least 3 different types of fire. It didn't so much land as it did collide with the amphitheater's upper tier, sending chunks of ancient stonework flying in all directions. The crash was spectacular. Enough that even the Grimlocks stopped their menacing posturing to watch. The ship's hatch exploded outward. Not opened. Exploded. Because apparently, normal door mechanisms are for people who aren't Marcus Kane. He stepped out of the wreckage like he was walking onto a beach resort. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like standard human military fatigues that had been through several wars and a few natural disasters. His face had that particular expression humans get when they're about to do something incredibly stupid and completely unreasonable. "Well," he said, his voice carrying easily across the sudden silence, "this looks fun." General Thok, who had been in the middle of what was probably a very impressive pre-murder speech, stopped mid-sentence and stared. "Human!" he growled, the word dripping with the kind of contempt usually reserved for intestinal parasites. Marcus grinned. It was not a pleasant expression. "That's Mr. Human to you, ugly. I want you to understand something about humans. They're not the strongest species in the galaxy. They're not the smartest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. What they are, however, is completely and utterly insane. Most species, when faced with impossible odds, will calculate their chances of survival and make rational decisions based on those calculations. Humans see impossible odds as a personal challenge." Marcus looked around at the 5,000 heavily armed warriors surrounding them, then at Princess Lyra, who was still standing by the treaty table, like she was waiting for someone to bring her a sandwich. "You know, Princess," he called out, "when I got the invitation to this little party, nobody mentioned it was going to be this kind of fun." Lyra finally turned around. For the first time since the messenger's arrival, she showed something other than mild annoyance. She looked curious. "Mr. Kane, I presume. I didn't invite you." "No," Marcus agreed, pulling something from his belt. It was a shield, not some high-tech energy barrier or quantum defensive matrix. An actual, honest-to-physics metal shield, the kind that medieval humans used to bash each other with. But someone did. That someone being my personal sense of timing, which has always been terrible. General Thok had apparently recovered from his surprise. "Human!" he roared, raising his massive war axe above his head. "You will die alongside the princess." Marcus hefted his shield and took a step forward. One step, that's all. But something about the way he moved made 5,000 Grimlock warriors shift nervously. "See, here's the thing," Marcus said, his voice conversational like he was discussing the weather. "I really don't like bullies, and you, General Ugly, are definitely a bully." The amphitheater fell silent except for the wind whistling through the cracks in the ancient stone. Even I held my breath, floating in my observation pod, waiting to see what would happen next. Princess Lyra was staring at Marcus Kane with an expression I couldn't quite read. It might have been admiration. It might have been the look you give someone who's clearly lost their mind, but is being entertaining about it. "Mr. Kane," she said slowly, "there are 5,000 of them. There is one of you." Marcus looked around, making a show of counting. "Huh, so there are. That hardly seems fair." "For you," General Thok snarled. "For them," Marcus corrected. And that's when the arrows started falling like rain. Grimlock archers, positioned on the amphitheater's upper tiers, had been waiting for this moment. The sky darkened with thousands of projectiles, each one capable of punching through standard body armor, all aimed directly at Princess Lyra. Most beings would have panicked. "Run!" screamed, prayed to whatever deities they favored. Marcus Kane raised his shield and stepped directly in front of the princess. The arrows struck like thunder. The sound was deafening, a continuous drumbeat of metal against metal. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't step aside. He just stood there, his shield raised, absorbing impact after impact. When the rain of arrows finally stopped, he was still standing. The shield in his hands looked like it had been through a meat grinder, but he was still standing. "Is that the best you've got?" he called out to General Thok, his voice slightly hoarse but unbroken. "Because if it is, I'm really disappointed." Princess Lyra stood behind him, completely unharmed, staring at the human with something that might have been wonder. "Why?" she whispered, just loud enough for my sensors to pick up. Marcus glanced back at her over his shoulder. "Because someone has to." General Thok was no longer looking amused. If anything, he looked confused, which is never a good sign in someone holding a weapon the size of a small tree. "Impossible," he muttered. "No one can withstand the arrow storm of the Horde." "Yeah, well," Marcus said, flexing his shoulders like he was working out a crick. "Nobody told me that was impossible. You really should have led with that information." That's when I realized I was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just because a human had survived the arrow storm, though that was certainly noteworthy. Not even because he'd done it to protect someone he'd never met before. No, what made this moment special was the look in Marcus Kane's eyes. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even particularly concerned. He looked annoyed, like the Grimlocks had interrupted something important. "You know what?" he said, dropping the ruined shield and cracking his knuckles. "I was having a perfectly good day until you idiots showed up. I was going to grab some decent food, maybe catch a show, possibly find a nice cantina where the drinks don't try to dissolve your tongue." He started walking toward General Thok, not running, not charging, walking, like he was strolling through a park. "Instead," he continued, "I get to spend my afternoon dealing with oversized toddlers who think pointing sharp sticks at innocent people makes them tough." The entire Grimlock horde was staring at him now. 5,000 warriors, each one capable of ripping apart a hover tank with their bare hands, watching one human walk toward their leader like he owned the place. "This isn't possible," someone in the crowd whispered. "Humans don't do this," another voice added. "Someone should tell him he's outnumbered," suggested a third. Marcus stopped walking when he was about 10 feet away from General Thok, close enough that the massive alien's shadow fell across him like a dark blanket. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "You and your merry band of fashion disasters are going to apologize to the princess. Then you're going to leave, quietly, without making any more messes for me to clean up." General Thok stared down at him. "And if we refuse?" Marcus smiled again. The same expression he'd worn earlier, but somehow more intense, like he was looking forward to the answer. "Then things get interesting." The thing about General Thok? He had the brain capacity of a particularly dim asteroid, which is why, instead of taking the hint and backing down like any sensible being with a functioning survival instinct, he decided to take a swing at Marcus with that oversized axe of his. I've seen Grimlock axes in action before. They're designed to split starship hulls. The swing Thok unleashed could have leveled a small building. The air itself screamed as the massive blade carved through it, aimed directly at Marcus's head. Marcus ducked. Not some elaborate combat maneuver. Not a tactical roll or defensive matrix deployment. He just ducked. Like someone had thrown a ball at him during a casual game of catch. The axe sailed over his head, taking a chunk out of the stone wall behind him. Thok, thrown off balance by his own momentum, stumbled forward. Marcus punched him in the knee. Now, you have to understand, Grimlock knees are not delicate things. They're armored, reinforced, and generally considered about as vulnerable as neutronium. But Marcus hit that knee with the precision of a surgical strike and the enthusiasm of someone who really, really enjoyed his work. The sound was memorable, like someone snapping a tree branch, if tree branches were made of titanium and bad decisions. General Thok, all 7 feet and several tons of him, dropped to the ground with a howl that probably registered on seismic equipment 3 star systems away. "Huh," Marcus observed, shaking out his hand. "That worked better than expected." The silence that followed was the kind that makes you question the fundamental nature of reality. 5,000 Grimlock warriors stood frozen, watching their supposedly invincible leader writhing on the ground, clutching his knee and making sounds that no self-respecting predator should ever make. "Anyone else want to try their luck?" Marcus asked, looking around the crowd with genuine curiosity. "I've got all day, and honestly, this is more fun than I've had in months." That's when something extraordinary happened. Something I'd never seen before in all my centuries of documenting interspecies stupidity. The Grimlocks began to back away. Not retreat, mind you, backing away. There's a difference. Retreating suggests an organized tactical withdrawal. This was more like 5,000 heavily armed warriors suddenly realizing they had urgent appointments elsewhere. "This is impossible," whispered a Grimlock lieutenant, his voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Humans don't fight like this." "Humans don't do any of this," another added, gesturing helplessly at Marcus, who was now helping General Thok to his feet with the kind of courtesy usually reserved for elderly relatives. Marcus dusted off Thok's armor with gentle pats. "There we go, big guy. No hard feelings, right?" "Well, except for your knee. That's probably going to hurt for a while." Princess Lyra had been watching this entire exchange with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly complex mathematical equation. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Kane," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "That was unprecedented." "What, the knee thing?" Marcus shrugged. "Basic anatomy, really. Every species has joints. Joints have weak points. It's not rocket science. The entire galaxy knows that Grimlock warriors are invincible in single combat," she continued. "Their bone density alone should have made your attack ineffective." "Should have, yeah," Marcus agreed. "But did it? That's the real question, isn't it?" General Thok, who had finally stopped making undignified sounds, looked up at Marcus with something approaching awe. "What are you?" he asked, his voice smaller than you'd expect from someone that size. "Tired," Marcus replied honestly. "Also hungry, and getting a little cranky because I missed lunch for this whole dramatic nonsense." He looked around at the assembled warriors, who were still standing there like someone had hit them with a paralysis ray. "Look, I get it. You guys have a reputation to maintain. Big, scary, unstoppable, all that good stuff. But here's the thing about reputations." He paused for effect, clearly enjoying himself. "They're only as good as your last fight." That's when Thok did something that made my recording equipment malfunction from sheer incredulity. He knelt down in front of Marcus Kane. Not surrendered, not submitted. Knelt, in the formal Grimlock position of respect usually reserved for honored elders and particularly impressive explosions. "We acknowledge your strength, human," Thok said, each word sounding like it was being dragged out of him with industrial equipment. "You have bested me in fair combat. By the ancient laws of our people, we are bound to honor your victory." Marcus looked down at the kneeling general with the expression of someone who'd just been handed a gift he wasn't sure he wanted. "That's nice. Really. But I didn't beat you up for your respect. I beat you up because you were being a bully." "Nevertheless," Thok insisted, "the Grimlock Horde recognizes your authority in this matter. What would you have us do? Now, this is where most beings would have gotten drunk on power. Started making demands, maybe taken over a planet or two, possibly declared themselves emperor of something impressive. Standard operating procedure for anyone who'd just humiliated 5,000 warriors single-handedly." Marcus Kane looked at Princess Lyra, who was still standing by the treaty table, then back at General Thok. "Sign the treaty," he said simply. "The real one. The one you were supposed to sign before you decided to get all murdery about it." "But," Thok began, then stopped himself. "The terms were not favorable to our people." "Then negotiate better terms," Marcus replied, like he was explaining basic addition to a particularly slow child. "That's what diplomacy is for. You sit down, you talk. You figure out a deal that doesn't involve anyone dying. It's not complicated." Princess Lyra had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. "Mr. Kane," she said slowly, "are you suggesting that the Grimlock Horde and the Ethereal Empire engage in actual diplomacy?" "Crazy idea, I know," Marcus said. "But hey, I'm just a human. What do I know about complex interstellar politics?" That got a laugh from Lyra. Actual laughter, bright and clear, echoing off the ancient stones of the amphitheater. "You know, Mr. Kane, I believe you might be the most dangerous negotiator in the galaxy." "Nah," Marcus said, grinning. "I just hate paperwork. The faster you two figure this out, the faster I can go find that cantina I mentioned." What happened next was something that would be talked about in diplomatic circles for generations. Princess Lyra and General Thok, with Marcus Kane serving as what he called a motivational consultant, sat down at the treaty table and actually negotiated. Not the usual diplomatic dance of veiled threats and impossible demands. Real negotiation. Give and take. Compromise. The kind of thing that textbooks say is supposed to happen but rarely does when you're dealing with species who consider subtle to be a dirty word. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of back and forth, with Marcus occasionally interjecting helpful comments like, "That's stupid!" and "Try again," but with less whining this time. By the end of it, they had a treaty that both sides could actually live with. Trade agreements that made sense. Territorial boundaries that didn't require a team of lawyers to interpret. Mutual defense clauses that didn't sound like they'd been written by someone having a particularly violent fever dream. "This is acceptable," General Thok declared, holding up the finished document. He sounded surprised, like someone had just explained to him how gravity worked. "More than acceptable," Princess Lyra agreed. "This is actually quite good." Marcus was sitting on the steps of the amphitheater, watching the sunset paint the ancient stones in shades of gold and crimson. "See? Wasn't that better than all the stabbing and shooting?" "Much better," Lyra said, settling down beside him. "Though I have to ask, why did you really come here today? And don't say it was your sense of timing." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the Grimlock warriors pack up their weapons with the kind of efficiency that comes from centuries of practice. "Got a message," he said finally. "Anonymous. Said a friend of mine might be in trouble." "A friend?" Lyra raised an eyebrow. "We've never met before today." "No," Marcus agreed. "But I heard about you. The princess who stands up to tyrants, who fights for her people even when the odds are impossible, who'd rather die than compromise her principles." He looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "Sounds like my kind of person." Princess Lyra stared at him for a long moment, then laughed again. "You realize, Mr. Kane, that by human standards, what you did today was completely insane." "By human standards," Marcus grinned. "Lady, by human standards, getting out of bed in the morning is completely insane. We live on a planet that's constantly trying to kill us, in a universe that's actively hostile to our existence, and we do it with a smile on our faces." "That's terrifying," General Thok observed from where he was supervising the treaty-signing ceremonies. His knee was apparently feeling better. "That's humanity," Marcus corrected. "We don't do things because they're safe or smart or reasonable. We do them because they need doing." As the twin suns of Sanctum Prime set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold, I finished my report. The official version, the one that would go into the Galactic archives, was quite different from what actually happened. Official reports don't usually include phrases like impossible human nonsense or physics-defying stupidity. But the truth? The truth was that I'd witnessed something remarkable that day. Not just the impossible sight of a single human facing down 5,000 warriors and winning. Not just the unprecedented cooperation between two species who'd been enemies for centuries. I'd witnessed the birth of a legend. Within a week, stories about Marcus Kane and the Battle of Sanctum Prime were spreading across the galaxy. Each retelling made the odds a little more impossible, the victory a little more spectacular, the human a little more mythical. Some versions claimed he'd fought all 5,000 warriors at once. Others said he'd done it blindfolded, with one hand tied behind his back, while composing poetry. One particularly creative account suggested he'd defeated the entire Grimlock horde using nothing but harsh language and disapproving looks. The truth, as I'd witnessed it, was both simpler and more complex. Marcus Kane hadn't won through superior strength or advanced technology or mystical powers. He'd won because he was willing to stand up to bullies, regardless of the consequences. And that more than anything else, was the most terrifying thing about humans. They'd do the right thing even when it was stupid, especially when it was stupid. Princess Lyra and General Thok became unlikely friends over the following months, their treaty serving as a model for peaceful relations throughout the sector. The Ethereal Empire and the Grimlock Horde, ancient enemies, found common ground in their shared bewilderment at human behavior. As for Marcus Kane, last I heard, he'd found his cantina, somewhere on the Outer Rim, serving drinks that probably violate several health codes and telling stories that probably violate several laws of physics. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where the odds are impossible, the enemy is overwhelming, and hope seems lost, remember this story. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "Not today." And if that person happens to be human, well, then you might just witness something that makes the universe sit up and take notice. Because humans, bless their insane little hearts, have never met an impossible situation they wouldn't try to solve with a combination of stubborn determination and creative violence. It's terrifying. It's inspiring. It's completely, utterly, magnificently human. And that's why, despite everything I've seen in my 700 rotations around this galaxy, despite all the wars and disasters and cosmic stupidity I've documented, I still think humans might just be the most dangerous species in the universe. Not because they're strong or smart or technologically advanced, but because they care. And caring, as any experienced observer will tell you, is the most dangerous thing of all.